Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Roxborough House Roundtables. This is our second roundtable. We'll be discussing where do we produce our apparel. Today's host is
Marie-Eve Faust. Thank you all for coming. First of all, I would like to introduce my guest for today. We're going to have Professor Wise. Marcia Wise has a BS in Textile Design from Philadelphia College of Textile and Science and an MFA in Fiber from Savannah College, Art of Design. Prior to teaching here at Philadelphia University, she ran design and development teams for home furnishing for large international corporations. She's been teaching for almost 10 years here at Philadelphia University in the textile design department. Her works include creation of multi-layers textile for galleries, and her research are focusing on artisanal textile of Central Asia and West Africa. Thank you, Marcia.
Thank you.
We have Professor Anu Dada, who is Associate Professor of Economics in the School of Business Administration at Philadelphia University. Prior to joining Philadelphia University, she taught at University of Wisconsin, College of New Jersey. She received her PhD in Economics from University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. She taught courses in Economic Statistics and Health Policy here at Philadelphia University. Her researches are divided in three areas: international trade, healthcare policy, and applied research in industrial organization. She received the NTC, National Textile Center grant related to her research in textile and apparel industry. Her research was presented in various national and international conferences, and she has been publishing in many academic journals. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
We have with us Professor Ray Poto. Professor Poto has a BS from Temple University and an MBA from George Washington University, as well as a CPA. Professor Poto has been teaching and working in public accounting, audit and taxation, and in financial management in healthcare field. He was heavily involved in the CPA review courses and as a teacher. He's been working in this field prior to teaching here at Philadelphia University since numbers of years, and has been taught number of undergraduate and graduate accounting course. He has published 3 books and numerous articles in accounting fields. He also served as the SBA Dean from 1993 to 1998. Thank you for being with us. We have with us also Professor Raju Parakal. Professor Parakal has a BA and a MA in economics from Mahatma Gandhi University in India, an MA in economics from University of Miami, an MA in international study, and a PhD in international relations from Florida International University. He also holds a Chartered Financial Analysis, CFA, certification from the ICFI in India. He was employed as a foreign exchange consultant in India prior to teaching here at Philadelphia, since he's with us since 2011 as an assistant professor in international relations, and he teaches global politics, global economy, senior capstone, and contemporary perspective. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
And we have with us 3 special students who joined us. We have Christopher Dang. Christopher is a sophomore here at Philadelphia University, Vietnamese American. He was born in Minneapolis. He traveled a lot for now being here as a student in fashion merchandising management. He is also AR for first year students representative, ambassador, social media coordinator for campus publication of Styline magazine, and sales associate at Uniqlo. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We have also with us Emily Williams. Emily Williams is a junior majoring in fashion merchandising management. She comes from a very small town, as she says, northeast Pennsylvania, Springville. She is actually sales associate at the Limited, and she is actually in love with this little company. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
We have also with us Elaine Mitchell. Elaine is a junior at Philadelphia University, double majoring in fashion merchandising and accounting. Elaine is from Long Island, and she hopes to also pursue her graduate school here at Philadelphia University to receive her MBA and eventually her CPA license. She danced since she was about 3 years old. She loves fashion, and she thinks she's very fortunate to be with us, and we also think she's fortunate to be with us.
Thank you.
So I am Marie-Eve Faust. I'm from Canada, French-Canadian. I worked in the industry prior to teach, and I am now fashion merchandising professor at Philadelphia University. And I'll let our host, to introduce himself. Mr. Professor
You are the
Lane.
host, I'm just the guest. Very impressive group, by the way. I don't know, you were also smart, my goodness.
They're very clever.
I'm Evan Lane. My background is I'm an attorney. I have a JD from Rutgers University, and I have a master's in American history also from Rutgers University. I am the director of the Law and Society program here, teach classes in Law and Society. I have taught global politics as well and recent past, and I'm also the director of the Arlen Specter Center for Public Service, where we are sitting today in the living room. Thank you for having me.
Okay, so maybe we could start already with a little bit an overview of the topic. I think that everyone knows what's going on, that we've been producing overseas since a few years, I should say maybe a few decades already. What's happening in America may not be the first time that it happens around the world. Many of you have read Mass Customization by Pine a few decades ago, where he started his book saying that there was this big country producing a lot, having a lot of research going on, and then suddenly production moved somewhere else, and that country was not America, but it was England, where the new country, and the topic of the book, was America. So since then we had a lot of knowledge, we did a lot of research, and what happened maybe 100 years ago happened again, and now we're seeing the production going from America, going overseas somewhere else. We had different factors, I guess, that happened at the same time. Some could say we had the open countries, we had these free trade agreement, the American market was probably saturated, the internet, some countries were more open than they were before, if we just think about China as for example. So all these things combine, I think together, we end up with the picture that we have today. And basically, no, we're not producing that much more in America, but we're producing overseas. Now, a lot of people thought, we've been losing jobs, the economy is not the same, so what should we do? And a lot of people are now thinking of what are the pros and the cons of having this production made overseas. And maybe I could start with you, Marcia, since you're more related to raw material maybe than anyone else, and this is where it starts from. So maybe I could ask you, do we have raw material produced in America? Do we have manufacturers still in America? Should we go overseas? And what is your personal opinion about this?
Thank you for that question. Certainly the textile industry in the US today is dramatically different than it was even 20 years ago. We do grow cotton in the US, we do extrude polyester, we do still make a significant amount of textiles in a variety of methods. But I think the main difference today is that whereas it used to be economies of scale, in the US, if we could do it and do it in tens of thousands of yards, we did it. That was the means to success. And companies, large international companies, Burlington Industries, J.P. Stevens, Milliken, were all massive companies whose businesses were built around the textile business. That's all changed dramatically because it was no longer, we're going to place an order and we want 50,000 yards of the same thing. It was, we want 250 yards or 50 yards. So flexibility is something that those who are producing in the US today, we see the companies are willing to be flexible, willing to produce smaller lots, willing to react and respond more quickly to customer demands. Obviously with importing textiles, and I'm really focused on the textile aspect as opposed to necessarily the apparel, as opposed to necessarily the end product, but with textiles, the opportunities exist to certain different countries do things really, really well. And so there are times that it makes a lot of sense to source textiles from other countries because of expertise that is inherent in those countries. There are times that it makes sense to produce the textiles here because there's faster turnaround. It's not necessarily going to be the lowest cost, but it depends a lot on the product as well. So I think the business is dramatically different. But the one thing that has remained true is that the design end of things happens where the market is. So if you are sitting in New York City, hopefully you're designing for the US, as opposed to if you're sitting in another country. You need to really understand your customer base to be able to design for that customer
Marshall,
base.
I guess for clarification, because I think you've divided in two ways. You have the raw material, and then that's one thing, and we're still producing a significant amount of that.
Correct.
And you have the design element, which we're still doing a significant amount of that.
Correct.
But the putting together apparel, taking the raw material, using the design, that's not taking place in America.
Some of that's taking place in America, but again, generally in smaller ways. And if anything, what we see is we're starting to see a movement with smaller manufacturers making the apparel in the US. So again, not the large economies of scale. We don't really see that today as it had existed, but it's people in Brooklyn are setting up shops where they can do all of it. There are farmers in Pennsylvania that are raising sheep and harvesting the fiber and spinning it and turning it into product. So we're seeing smaller, more niche market, let's say, and even in terms of the apparel manufacturing. But the large economies of scale, it's not happening today in the US.
So if we're talking about large economy of scales, maybe I could ask Professor Poto, do you think we won by going overseas? Do you think that bottom line, it was a good thing if we look at, because we always talk about the cost of the goods sold, but that's like Professor Wise was saying, this is raw material, this is manpower, but bottom line, how could we see like all these different aspects on a financial point of view?
Well, I think as far as economies of scale are concerned, you definitely, I think the whole reason people went abroad was that there are lower costs, lower labor costs, lower rental and space costs, virtually everything was lower cost. And since the main interest is, at least in a capitalist system, in providing profits and higher ends for shareholders, that will probably continue, except for some of the smaller, more customized kinds of products, which I think could still be done here. In fact, when Marcia was saying what she was saying, I was thinking about two things I had just read about smaller levels of production here. In preparing for this, and it's really small, and that's because it's more costly. If you're going to do something on a small scale, it's definitely going to cost more than massive production in any case. And one of the cases here says, let's see, this was somebody who's doing production in New York. This is a designer, New York designer, Giuliano Cho. She relies on a small group of local knitting ladies in their 80s to fashion hand-knit sweaters. Hand knitting is a dying trade, she said. Cho opened her first outpost in the West Village in 2002, small women's apparel label. All her garments are made in New York City. She opened a second location in 2012. And listen to the prices. This is what I think is untenable massively, but maybe quite tenable for a specific audience. Tops retail for roughly $350.
Whoa.
$365 for skirts and pants. And it's obvious here, there's a limited workforce and the cost is high, so the price is going to be high. Likewise, there's another person who makes something like Raleigh denim jeans, and he started in 2007 in Virginia. And those jeans are selling for anywhere from $195 to $325 a pair. So obviously, they're not getting the cost savings they would by having a base of fixed cost across which you can spread major amounts of production. They can't do that. So they still have a base fixed cost, but relatively low production and not a very big labor market, and a labor market that's probably still more costly, certainly than Mexico. Now, China's labor costs are going up, but Mexico has now become more competitive.
Just interested in the students because you're the fashion consumers. Starting with Emily, I guess, when you go shopping, how much does cost enter into it versus other considerations like work conditions overseas?
Well, as like a student, I obviously can't afford to be spending a lot of money on my clothes, but from working in retail, I've learned like a lot about like what goes into a piece, and I know that like when I was trained, I learned a lot about like where our garments are produced, and just from like learning in class and stuff, like you realize like the conditions that some people are placed in and the conditions that like our clothes come out of. But especially talking about the small markets and the hand knitted sweaters, like there is a market for that. There are people that are like, it's becoming bigger and bigger to have like a handmade or like a one of a kind of fashion piece, and there's definitely like fashion is evolving, I think, to kind of one of a kind. People want something that stands out and something that seems more individualized towards them.
Does it apply to students, or it's only for parents and mothers, or do you think it could apply to you?
I think eventually, I mean, it's hard because most students, you know, we're on a very, very fixed budget, and of course we want to have things that are very new, very, very trendy, something that no one else has, and it's hard to get that, which is why we turn to more cheaper options like fast fashion options, which are mass produced, of course, because we want to be, you know, the next big thing. But maybe eventually, you know, depending how the economy goes, you know, we'll be able, and when we have jobs, because more young people are becoming richer. There are more young people who are able to like start companies and things like that and have more of an income to spend more and, you know, have more quality over quantity.
You're a designer, right, Chris?
No, I'm fashion merchandising and management.
Okay.
Yeah.
But if you go into a store and there's a shirt that you like,
Yeah.
and it's $75,
Yeah.
produced in China,
Yeah.
identical shirt, produced in the United States, $150, but it's produced under U.S. laws, no children working, no sweatshops. Honestly?
Honestly, I will buy the $75 shirt. One, as a student, because it fits my budget. If it's the same material, if it looks the same, and the construction and the quality of the construction is still similar, then the $75 shirt I will take. And I think that just comes from practicality as a student. I don't think that says anything about, hopefully, not too much about my character.
You're frugal.
So maybe I could ask you, Professor Dada, what are the consequences of producing overseas versus locally if we look at it on an economic point of view?
Yeah. Well, I actually agree with all three of you. And what I would like to maybe talk a little bit about is how economists view this. And I just found a very interesting article which I've left here if anyone wants to take a look at. So the question, I'm just going to read one sentence from there. It says, I really want to buy American-made clothing, but it's just too expensive. All right. So your point that the only kind of companies that can survive here have to be niche, have to be those more expensive kind of markets. Whereas when you talk about mass production, it's not sustainable here anymore. And basically what an economist would tell you is that it's a question of comparative advantage. So if you don't have the article in front of you, this is a very good illustration of what's going on. So when I buy a t-shirt from Bangladesh, the labor cost is only 50 cents. And the cost of labor in this country at the lowest is about $7. And labor is a big part of, so you're talking about the kind of industry we're talking about here. So if you look at apparel specifically, not so much textile, a big part of the total cost of apparel is labor. It's very, very labor intensive. And even raw materials to some extent. So when you take into account raw materials and labor, the cost of a t-shirt, and this was a breakup they did, Planet Money did an experiment, and this is NPR's Planet Money, and they found when you source that t-shirt from Bangladesh, the cost was only $2. When you made the same t-shirt in the US, it cost $10.78. So that kind of gives you the answer as to why this industry has moved out.
Let me add one thing, because here this is talking about fabric and labor, that's direct material
Yeah.
and labor. And the other major cost is overhead. I mean, you've got to have a factory, you've got to have machinery. Look at the numbers here for sewn in Bangladesh, 24,470 Ts. Sewn in the US, 165. The cost, first of all, in total in Bangladesh is going to be lower. Further, you're going to spread it over many more units. So,
Economies of scale.
you know, if we're talking about for just direct material and direct labor, this kind of difference, you could probably easily add another $10 difference for overhead.
Right. No, exactly the point. Even though the numbers here reflect what's going on right now, even if we could mass produce today in the US, it's still not sustainable because the cost of the t-shirt you are buying would be maybe 5 times more than what you are buying it for right now. So essentially what economics tells you is this, that as the structure of an economy changes, so wages have gone up in this country, minimum wage is higher, which is a good thing, industry is going to change. So there will be certain kinds of industries we are better off specializing in. So I could use my labor probably better if I was working in the computer industry or a high-tech industry, instead of using that labor to make garments which don't give you that, but the value added is pretty low. So it's fine that this garment gets produced in Vietnam or in China or some such other place where they have the comparative advantage. Why? Because their cost of labor is very low, and they're not, for them capital is more expensive, and this industry does not require too much capital. And so how does that benefit the consumer in the US, for instance? So if you look at the US, the standard of living in the US has gone up to a very large extent because of trade. So things have become cheaper for us. So if you have $1,000 to spend, you are able to buy a whole lot more things because you're not spending so much on your clothes anymore. And so that has allowed you to buy your iPhone and buy your other things, right? So as a consumer, you're certainly better off. As a country, we are better off. However, are there losers? And when you look at the textile industry, when it was dying out, there were a lot of engineers who were trained to do this kind of work, and suddenly those jobs went away. And so there is an immediate cost. And these are people who might not find a job that easily. And so the question is, do we have a plan, do we have a social net, or some kind of a plan which compensates, the loss of jobs due to trade? So that's one thing. There's another labor issue which we can talk about later. What's happening is outsourcing lowering wages in the US. And that could be another issue we could talk about. But as of now, I think comparative advantage tells you this is an industry we have to let go of and specialize in something else. And again, those niche markets can stay. So if we are producing here, it's going to be costly, so it's going to be people who are looking for something very specific and they're willing to pay for it. And that might still continue.
I'm just to follow up on what you said. I'm curious about the economic issues, the political issues, with the fact that there has certainly been talk that the wages in China are rising. So then we went from China to Vietnam. Like there's this perpetual chasing down of cost,
Yes.
and obviously there are issues that surround that in all sorts of realms. And so I'm curious about the group's perspective on that issue.
The interesting thing I heard about, I went to China about 3 or 4 years ago with the MBA students, and we actually went to Luentai. That's a big textile firm there. And what they were talking about essentially was that for them it's becoming a little untenable now because wages in China are rising. So they are not the lowest cost. However, when you look at other factors like overheads and all that, they still are better off. So they were saying what they have started doing is essentially is they are outsourcing. So they are probably going to Vietnam and getting some of their stuff done, and then they export it to the US. So that, there's this dynamics going on even within Asia, which is very interesting.
I just have, again, it's a historical note here, again to the students. Are you aware of the U.S.'s history of exploitation? Because so we began in the apparel business. What group did we exploit early for extremely cheap, if not free? You have an answer for it?
Slaves.
Slaves, because that's how we started. And then that ran out. Look what Marsha said, it seems to be always running out. So that ran out, thank God. But who replaced the slaves?
Women and children.
Women and children, exactly. And when they started getting a little more rights, who replaced them in exploitation? Immigrants. The Jews, the Polish, the Italians, they came in. So our history is this chase that Marsha was talking about. We keep on chasing exploitation. And sooner or later, you imagine where we're going to end up with the Eskimos. I mean, this is this last place. I mean, where is it going to end up finally? But it's not like everything was hunky-dory in the U.S. always, and we were always so nice about it. We've been, the corporations, have been exploiting workers from the very beginning. We just keep on moving around, that's all.
But Evan, I would challenge that a little bit. So when you're saying, you use the word exploitation, but really when you look at trade, and as China opened up, as India opened up, what has happened essentially is all these manufacturing and industry went there, and that has raised people out of poverty. So 30% of the population in China is now out of poverty because they have these jobs. And so it's not, so when you look at trade, at least from the economist's point of view, it's a win-win on both sides, really. Now, are the conditions ideal? No, but if you look at the alternative, they were in a much worse situation than they are today.
And
so a lot.
Yeah, complete. Complete. I'm just going to support something.
Yeah, so so a lot of these people have been lifted out of poverty because all these jobs have become available. And as people keep moving up, actually the people at the bottom start moving up too. So is there some exploitation? Are the conditions great? Maybe not. But is it better than where it was before? I would say yes.
Yeah.
So we were talking about that prior to the roundtable, and Raju, I would like to have your opinion on this.
Yeah, here's the thing. I'm actually conflicted because of my training. I'm an economist and I'm a political scientist.
Yes.
So I'm going to give both opinions from both sides. One thing I would kind of go with what you said, and from the West, from when we see from here, what we're comparing is our levels and our standards. And yes, it is bad. But if you look at the other industries in those countries, these so-called sweatshops are actually much better conditions than what they have otherwise locally there. I'm not generalizing, but in many cases they are better there, and that's the reason why you find 30% drop in poverty in China and 25% in India over the last 20 years. But that's the economist in me. Now the political scientist in me is going to come out now and say that all economics takes place in a political space. Mm-hmm. And so when we talk about comparative advantage and when we talk about people losing their jobs, they are not going to come back and ask the corporation that you give us our jobs back because people know they lost their jobs. They're going to ask their politicians. They're going to ask their political leaders, and they need to have an answer. And they cannot say, oh, it's comparative advantage, you go and to find another job. Because here is the fact of the matter, and that's again my political scientist in me. Capital can actually move much faster than labor can, especially when you're moving from one area to another area. It's very hard for someone who's been over the last 30 years trained to do stuff in textiles and garments and apparel to suddenly say, now you got a computer, start being a computer engineer. It is impossible. And we tried that in the United States. We had that, I forgot the exact title, in the 50s, the RTAA, the rehabilitation of people who lost their jobs because of globalization, trade related, exactly. That went nowhere because of, it's a government program, so you know how it works, right, or doesn't work. And it was impossible to retrain people into new lines of activity. I mean, if I, God forbid, I mean, if I lose my job as a professor because technology takes it over, I cannot be an insurance salesman. I'm sorry, I'm not trained for that. I'm not trained for that.
Great.
What's that? I know I'm great, but
You are in Philadelphia University, you should be able to reinvent yourself.
yeah.
Powered to do
Power to
it.
do it. What's today and tomorrow?
Nevertheless, if we look at people working in this industry, as you said,
Yeah.
corporations are asking a lot.
It's
and-
very difficult. So that's the political angle to it. Not just in the country that is losing the jobs, but also in the countries that get the jobs. Because they do understand that we are being exploited. They may not understand it initially, but they understand it after 10, 15 years. And that's what's happening in China, in Bangladesh, all those places. And from the, one final thing before I let go of the political scientist in me. The way in which you use the word we chase, we chase those profits. From the other side, it is called the race to the bottom. It's the race to the bottom because now initially China was competing for these jobs, and then Bangladesh came in, and then it's going to Vietnam, and the next stop could be even more desperate countries. The argument is that all these countries are racing, but they're not racing to the top, they're all racing to the bottom. So, but that's an argument, it's not proven theory. In fact, many people say it's not a good theory, but it is out there. I just want the audience to know that.
So, Professor Elaine, if we ask you your opinion on a legal point of view, we were talking prior to the open microphone, we were talking about a little bit what everyone said. Okay, we're going overseas, we're sourcing, and they do know, they don't know their rights. We're an American corporation, we go there, we have 50%, 51% control, more than that. And the employers over there has to work within our standards, if I understand. And then,
Well,
well,
that's the
they
problem.
do.
That's the problem, because they don't. A foreign national has a very, very difficult time enforcing United States law. Someone working for Foxconn, the famous Chinese manufacturer of Apple products, if they want to sue because they've been working 24 hours straight and not fed or whatever it may be, or whatever terrible conditions are there, they do have the ability to sue in a United States federal court. So you
they
can have,
do
they
have
can,
the ability to
yeah, but
sue.
it's a meaningless right.
Okay.
Because what happens is that the federal court, which it would be, has to do a thing called choice of laws. Whose laws to apply? Will it be the United States law or Chinese law? And what the courts have done is they apply Chinese law. So what's the point? Because they could have sued in China and applied the same law, which is not going to give them any help. The interesting thing about this that you and I were talking about earlier is if the US corporations really get behind close regulation of these subcontractors or sub-subcontractors, a smart lawyer on behalf of this Chinese worker will say, well, most of what was involved really came out of actions in the United States. Although everything happened in China, the corporate regulations, the self-regulations, were made in the United States. And then a court, in weighing things, will say, wait, maybe we should apply US law because these regulations were invented in the United States. So a
Understand.
smart corporation will not self-regulate because it's exposing them to liability, which would be a very difficult situation for them financially. So that is how it plays out legally. So the legal system actually encourages these corporations not to self-regulate, which would then, I say, require government regulation, which we don't have, of what goes on in foreign countries.
And to Evan's point, I think that's one area where trade can play a positive role. When you're saying that these multinational companies are going abroad, it is really the role of the US government to make sure that the labor laws that we have here are implemented there, because one, it improves the labor conditions in those countries and makes others emulate that, for one. And secondly, what you're saying is that the companies are not getting unfair advantage because we are losing jobs to some extent. So we look at the manufacturing sector, people who are not very highly educated. Many of them would depend on these kind of jobs, right? So we are losing. So it should not be an unfair advantage for companies. So one of the things, I mean, there's a very interesting article by Paul Krugman in the New York Times. He's a Nobel laureate, but he really writes a lot of columns in the New York Times. So he said there is a negative side, or there is a downside for us in this outsourcing and globalization that we've had. And one of the things that has happened is, as all these industries have moved out, where we would employ the less educated, the wages for those people in this country have either stagnated or gone down, because those jobs don't exist. So that has been. On the other hand, if you look at the other side of the spectrum, you look at the owners, they have gotten richer, because it's still the US companies that are getting their products manufactured. So you look at the iPhone makers and shareholders of iPhone, those people have gotten richer. So the gap, the income gap, has actually increased in the US, partly also due to trade. So that's, not everything is perfect. I mean, yeah, but if you are asking an economist, should we protect this industry? You cannot. That is not a possibility. But can we regulate it better? Can we make sure that the companies are paying taxes properly, so that the costs are not, they're not illegally making a lot of profit and moving out, because that's the case. But you have some laws, and so they, as far as pollution goes, as far as labor laws goes, if those are strictly regulated, then their costs also go up. So they have to think twice before they leave this country and go.
So I have another question, maybe to all of us, or whoever wants to answer. You're talking about pollution, and we all know, I lived in China, and we all know that when it's time for a manufacturer to be producing, it's mass production. I never saw one star, I keep saying, never saw one star in the sky living in China. It's just impossible. When the manufacturer closed for Chinese New Year for a week, it gets to be clearer a little bit, nevertheless. So we're talking about sustainability, we're talking about sustainability on different aspects, not only on is it sustainable to produce. So linking pollution, sustainability, transport, we're going all around the world. What is your opinion? Okay, bottom line, we understand that, yes, you explained it very clearly. It's impossible to compete on a large scale and have the same price. We have to accommodate, or a lot of people are happy to be accommodated by cheaper price. Okay, well, now, is it sustainable, like on different aspects? What's your opinion about that? Marcia?
I mean, so, well, certainly from an environmental standpoint, we as Americans can sit here and say it's not our issue because the pollution isn't here.
Correct.
And because those ships on the water for 3 months, it's not our issue. It's not, from my perspective, that's not the appropriate approach, but we are shielded from a lot of it because we don't see it. So, I wonder, I think the majority of people, when they walk into a store to buy anything, whether it's apparel or whatever, I suspect they never look at the label to see where it was made, what it's made of. I think people respond to, do they like the look? Is it the right price? Is it the right color? Does it fit me? And that's it. And don't think past that. To a great extent, the conversation about caring where it's made from, caring where it's made, caring what it's made of, that's kind of a luxury discussion. I mean, I'm not saying just the highest end, but there's an awful lot of the population that doesn't have the opportunity to make that decision. They can't afford that choice consideration.
Chris, you were going to say?
I was going to say that it's really interesting when you go shopping these days, and I think as sustainability is such a common topic now in most campuses, and a lot of these brands like H&M and Zara and Uniqlo, Gap, they realize that we are a large customer segment for them, and they actually provide a lot of their tags and in the store saying 100% cotton, or used with the lowest amount of manufacturing as possible, and it makes you feel a little bit better about yourself when you purchase a $5 shirt from H&M that says that it's 100% cotton.
H&M has a big publicity, or last year had it saying behind their counter, buy it only if you need it, or something like that.
Yeah.
Do you really need it? Or I thought it was really clever to at least saying,
Which
yes.
make people buy even more stuff
Yeah,
that they don't need, okay?
Well,
Look how cool that is, let me buy 5
No,
of
that's
them.
genius.
Well, I thought it was interesting. Yes, what you're saying, I think they're educating this younger generation about what is it made out of, where is it made out, and of course, maybe we are a generation that forget it. We never looked at that before, not because we're teaching in that field. Yes, we do, but this generation, maybe where we're not conscious about the issues where it was produced. On a sustainability issue, Emily, what you were going to say?
But also, like, we think about, like, with the fast fashion, like, mass production, there's so many pieces, there's so much clothes, like, there's so many things that you have to have, there's so much waste. Like, we don't wear clothes. Yeah, like, we don't wear clothes until it's end use. We throw it away. Like, very few people donate. And, like, honestly, like, there's so much waste of, like, textiles that, like, because we are just consumption. We're consumption nation. Like, it's all about we need to have it. We need to have it now. We need to have the best. We need to have the most.
And what's really interesting is I think that it's deeply rooted in just our culture in the U.S. It's just the way that we think. We don't need it. It doesn't fit us. And then we have no use for it. But in reality, okay, it doesn't fit you, but can someone else still wear it? And so companies like H&M actually and Uniqlo, I know, they take back their clothes. If it doesn't fit you anymore, you can bring it back to them. Some stores offer an incentive, like if you donate a certain amount, they'll give you a certain discount, which is sort of interesting. But I know from working with Uniqlo, if you're not familiar with that store, it's the 4th top retail store globally, and fashion clothing store. And they do a lot of initiatives, corporate initiatives towards the environment, socially, environmentally. And I know what they do with their clothes specifically that they get donated. They'll take it, they'll send it to a distribution center in that nation, in that country. They'll organize it into 12 different categories, and from gender and age and the colors and whatnot and what season. And they actually sit together in corporate Japan and they discuss with professionals on which villages or which countries need clothes the most. And I know they've done large donations in Africa and in Bangladesh. They have a very large presence in Bangladesh actually, and a large initiative with Bangladesh. And they send clothes to villages that need the most, and specific clothes. So if there's a village that they know for a fact pregnancy is abundant, then they send a lot of maternity clothing. If it's a more colder terrain and a flood has just occurred in the area and a monsoon has just occurred, then they send more winter clothing, long sleeve t-shirts and things like that. So they are trying to find corporations like them, and I don't know how honest you can really believe most corporations when you're online reading from their website and things like that. But I know for fact Uniqlo, they have an extensive online database of what they do, so
At least we could say that they're trying and they have the
and they're
initiative.
trying to find end uses for their products at least. Maybe not for elsewhere, but at least they're trying to maintain their amount of their effect on the world.
I don't want, this company sounds great and God bless them, okay?
I know this
But you know, you have, right. But companies like Walmart and Nike have quite the different history, and they're much, much bigger. And their history is incredible exploitation of people overseas. A complete non-caring of what goes on to children working, unbelievable hours, unbelievable conditions, unbelievable treatment by employers. And they've been turning a blind eye for the longest time because they don't have to look at it. Because the regulations, as Anu said, are not there to make them look at it. Now this company is smart because it's playing the public relations game and being nice. I would imagine if it wasn't making a profit, it would do something else. But that is working for them. The problem we have, and I think we've touched enough, is the moral responsibility we have as U.S. citizens in buying clothing, saying, who made these? And do I care? And do I care enough not to buy? I mean, it's really nice to say, oh, that's terrible. I'll just bring up some really quick, I know you guys have seen that Kent State sweatshirt that's been around. It's an abomination. For those that don't understand what it is, Kent State, 4 people were killed by the state militia there for no reason several years ago protesting the Vietnam War. And they're selling, what's Urban Outfitters, is selling a Kent State shirt that looks like it has blood all over it. Now they said it isn't, but they have a history of doing these things. The shirt is sold out, okay? It's sold out, it's $129 for a freaking sweatshirt, okay? So what I'm saying is that, yeah, we talk really nice as a country and take care, but our real history here, now and the past, is we don't care. And we don't care that Walmart does what it does and Nike does what it does.
I tend to agree with you. I think it's going to take some kind of massive social action, because while regulation is great, I think that's what would be nice, it just doesn't happen. For example, we have NAFTA, and I think you could address this better than anyone, Evan. Why is it that I know that I read when NAFTA first was coming in all these rosy stories about how labor standards would fuse and what we'd have in Mexico and Canada and the US would be very similar. It obviously is not the case. It's apparently not enforceable. And so even if there is an agreement that says, well, these are going to be the labor standards, it's obviously not working. So what's the only alternative? And it is social awareness. It seems to me that everybody has to understand what's going on.
So how could we make people more aware of this? I know we usually say we have to start with a new generation. I'll give you a few examples of, I know in Canada, in Sherbrooke, there's a city where kids going to school have a free pass to take transportation, public transportation, anywhere. They could have public transportation for free, because they said that's the only way we could change the way people are traveling, is by making this generation having to commute by public transportation. Another place, they don't allow them to bring bottle of water on campus, because they say everyone at home has a bottle of water they could fill in, so we'll provide nice place where they could have their water. So what could we do, maybe Raju, on this aspect? How could we train this maybe new generation, maybe not even you, maybe the younger ones coming up? What could we make them to be the niche that Marcia was talking about?
Are you talking about the United States, or are you talking about destinations where we source these garments from?
Well, a little bit of both.
A bit of both. Okay, let me start with the destination places. Regulations have to be rooted in the political and economic realities of the place and the time. Regulations have to be organic. If you impose our values and our regulations onto a different context and a different country which is in a very different place at that time, it will not work. Think about it. Just 100 years ago, we used to have sweatshops in New York, and it was an organic change. And the good thing is that in many of these destination countries where we source from, that change is happening much faster than it happened in the United States.
True.
Largely because of the values that international trade carries with it. So international trade is not just a trade of commodities and services; it's also a trade of ideas and values. And that's the organic growth I was talking about in those destination countries. Now here I would kind of go back to what Evan was talking about. Here we can bring in regulations, because I think our corporations are primed to do that. Let me give you an example. 15 years ago, US corporations could bribe foreign officials to get a foreign contract. They cannot do it now.
They weren't supposed to.
Yeah.
They were not supposed to, but they could get away legally.
Well,
It's
there
good.
was
get
a Foreign
caught.
Corrupt Practices Act. If anybody pursued it, that was around since 1970, but nobody enforced it.
Enforced it. But now corporations do, and US corporations actually complain that the French can do it and we cannot. We are losing the battle for bribing. But our corporations have cleaned up their act and they are very scared. Still, there are a few cases that come up occasionally, and
Yeah,
you
in
might
fact,
be.
going back to Evan's example of
Yeah.
Nike, there was a big, brouhaha about Nike sweatshops about 10 years ago, I think, and they have cleaned up their act.
Yeah.
So when you go, I went to one of the Nike shops when I was in Beijing, Guangzhou actually, and you could see
Yeah.
the conditions are very much like here. Certain things are not, but a lot of it has improved.
And they reacted to
to
Public outcry.
public
It didn't
outcry,
really
exactly.
react to
So I think
legislation.
to some extent is that education of the public, and I found this very interesting article. It says your iPhone causes China's pollution, and that's
That's why I have a
something-
Samsung.
That's
It kills few people.
so that needs to. So when you say that when you're taking a plane and going down to New Delhi or Beijing and everything looks brown, and we are always pointing fingers at those countries and you say you need to clean up your act, you need to clean up your act. But what we have done is we have actually shipped all our dirty industries there.
Absolutely.
All right. So a lot of manufacturing is happening there, which and a byproduct of that is the pollution. A lot of what is being consumed is not consumed there; it's being consumed here. So Emily's point that we are over-consuming, maybe it is also true, right? So I guess what is the solution? Is there a solution? The only thing I can say is public awareness of this, to realize that okay, this is not China polluting, but we are also contributing to it because we are getting our products manufactured there. So if there's greater awareness, so we can chip in somehow and say no, we need to take these steps, so that we're not just talking about other countries doing it. And if you look at the U.S. even today, we are one of the biggest polluters, even though a lot of manufacturing has left this country. So your point about changing the lifestyle, why do we not have a public transportation system where everybody could use that to go to work and not have to drive? Right now, when you go on Route 1, what you see is there's always one driver for one big car, and there are these hundreds of cars driving, which is adding to the pollution. Why don't we have a public transportation system? Why are we living so far away from the city?
So I would ask, Marcia, you talked about specific niche. Do you think we could have these niche to be addressed to this young generation? Or maybe you could do you have any ideas? How could we do, should we have these big labels? Should we do more education? Should we?
Well, I do think education and awareness that we've all been talking about, I think a lot of it hinges on that. And yes, we can regulate, but I do think it's more about the social change, the social attitudes towards consumption. And consumption and waste go hand in hand.
No, I have to agree. I think especially on being aware, especially our generation now where everything happens on social media, and I think that's a huge influence on what we do and how we act and our opinions about things. I mean, we can get information in milliseconds, and I think if we become more aware in that sense through the media, once there's one, it takes that one person and everyone's gonna follow. I think that's a very big way in that we act, especially our generation. We see one person do it, then we all want to do it, and we move with people. So if we do that, then eventually, hopefully, it will change, and we can become more aware and become more aware of what we're buying and materials and things like that.
I totally agree with Elena. That's a very good point you brought up, the role of social media. I think the younger generation is a lot more conscious, socially and environmentally conscious than we ever were. And I think social media plays a very big role. So if something is happening in China, now you can see it on a video, and that has a much bigger impact than hearing about it or reading about it.
Yeah.
So I think that is a real source for change at the social level. I totally agree.
I agree. I definitely agree with social media and it being for us it'll notify us a lot faster and better about what's going on in China, and we could respond and do like a uproar, and then the company responds to it and says, okay, we'll make the changes. But I do feel that that's more of a cat and dog sort of argument, and I feel like it's more deeply rooted than that. I feel like it really comes down to that wouldn't change our consumption, our ideology on consumption. And I really feel like we could try to do labels, we could try to do more infomercials or whatever it may be, commercials, advertisements. But at this point in time, with our generation, I think we're really good at bypassing and looking through 100 advertisements a day and ignoring them and not paying much attention to it. I think really what it's all about is our idea of consumption, and we don't value products as well as most other people around the world. And I feel like the only way to really address that issue is having parents raise their child to understand the value of their t-shirt or the value of their kids have iPads these days, and the value of the products that they have at a young age, so so that in the future, when they consume, they understand that it's more than just there's more to it after you overgrow it. There's more to it.
So I'm going to continue with Emily, and so based on what you said, you're the first generation who really went to thrift stores. So this is for us, it was like sharing the t-shirt to the youngest one of the family. You didn't have to do that. You're sharing it within your peers or your friends, which we didn't do that much. It was more like perception of being poor. When I remember thrift store started, it was like nowhere, you don't go there. Do you think you're going to be very conscious about the clothes you're going to be buying for your kids eventually? Are you going to be sharing, do you think, are you going to put a value on these t-shirts, or are you going to go to pick up the cheapest one?
Well, I'm a huge advocate for thrifting. Like, that's where a lot of my clothes come from. I love thrift shopping. And I think that that's like really, really valuable. Like, it's also becoming more because vintage is cool, so more people are like doing it maybe for the fashion looks, not necessarily for it helps like not so much waste. But I definitely think like I value that a lot, and I definitely want to pass it on to more people and more generations.
It's an interesting culture because I do feel like the majority of us who do shop at thrift shops at this point in time is because of the fashion aspect, but at the same time they don't know subconsciously that they're doing sort of a good deed. And when you let them know and you let people know, hey, you're thrifting, that means you are actually being more sustainable. They say, oh yeah, I am. That's why I do it.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think this conversation is quite interesting. I must say that for myself, before doing my master and my PhD, I work in the industry, and I was shocked the day that we decided to go overseas. Actually, I quit my job a few days after that, and I was like really shocked to see that we were putting everything in the hand of someone else. When we were so picky asking for, let's say, the Pantone colors, Marcia knows what it means. We were like, oh, I'm not sure the sample, I'm not sure the supplier would come 3-4 times at the office showing you, is that the right blue? When we started to source overseas, forget it. It was like the blue we're gonna get in 6 weeks, that's about it. So we lost, I think, a lot of our value, and you were talking about the consciousness of the fabric that you were using. I'm not saying on an economic point of view that we're gonna be able to sort or produce here on a large scale, and Anu and Ray Poto really highlight these aspects. But I think that if we're getting more conscious, if we educate our people more, if we have the chance to have more roundtables, we could understand more the downside of going overseas. And with the slow movement that started a few years ago with food, slow food, and we're seeing the market, maybe we are going to be producing nicer apparel for niche market, and these niche market garments are probably more well done, I would say, and these are probably the ones that you will find in the thrift store eventually.
I'd like to thank everybody for coming here today. Please listen to more of our roundtables. Again, thank you for all your time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.